In high school, they called me the janitor's kid. They wrote it on my locker in black marker and laughed in the hallways. I used to walk with my head down, pretending not to hear. But years later, I walked back into that same school, looked the principal in the eye, and said, "I'm here for the keys. I own this place now." He couldn't speak, and the bully who had tormented me for years, she ran out of the room. Before I share how it happened, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Elena Ruiz, and this story begins when I was 15 years old. Back then, I wasn't known for my grades or for sports or for being popular. I was known for one thing only, being the janitor's kid. My father, Miguel Ruiz, worked as the school janitor. He was a kind, hard-working man, the type of person who never complained no matter how many hours he spent mopping the floors or fixing broken lockers. At home, he was my hero, but at school, he was the reason I was mocked. Students whispered as he walked by with his cart of cleaning supplies. Some laughed when they saw him sweeping in the cafeteria, and because I was his daughter, I became their favorite target. My mother, Patricia, tried to comfort me. She would brush my hair in the mornings before school and tell me, "Mija, there's no shame in honest work. Your father is building a better future for you." I believed her, but believing didn't make the laughter stop. Every day I carried my books down hallways filled with kids who smirked, whispered, or shouted cruel jokes. Some days they scribbled janitor's kid on my locker. Other days, they shoved my father's name into conversations just to watch me shrink. The worst part wasn't even the words. It was how the teachers and the principal ignored it. They saw me struggle and chose to look away. I can still remember one afternoon when my bully, Jessica Hale, and her friends cornered me near the cafeteria. She smirked, held up her phone, and said, "Smile, Elena. I'm going to post this picture with the caption, 'Daughter of the Mop Man.'" Her friends roared with laughter while I stood frozen, wishing I could disappear. That kind of humiliation followed me for years. But what they didn't know was that every cruel word was building something inside me. At home, my father's words stayed in my heart. "The people who laugh at you now will one day answer to you." He said it with quiet certainty, as if he knew my story wasn't going to end in those hallways. At the time, I couldn't imagine how I would ever escape the weight of that label. But deep down, I knew I wanted more. I wanted to prove them wrong, not just for me, but for my father, who worked harder than anyone and never asked for respect, but deserved it more than all of them combined. And so, while they mocked me, I started dreaming of the day I would walk back through those same doors, not as the janitor's kid, but as someone who had taken every insult and turned it into fuel. High school was supposed to be a place to learn, to grow, and maybe even to feel like you belonged somewhere. For me, Crestwood High was the opposite. Every day felt like walking into a battlefield where I didn't stand a chance. I wasn't known as Elena Ruiz. I was known as the janitor's kid. It started small, just whispers in the hallway when my dad pushed his mop cart past the lockers. "There goes her dad," someone would snicker. But soon, it grew into something bigger. My locker became a canvas for cruel jokes. The words "janitor's kid" were written across it in permanent marker more than once. I remember scrubbing it off with tears in my eyes while students passed by, laughing. The humiliation burned so deeply that even when the words were gone, I could still see them. Jessica Hale, my main bully, made it her personal mission to remind me of my place every single day. She was tall, beautiful, and popular, the kind of girl who ruled the school just by walking into a room. She also had a cruel streak, and I was her favorite target. One afternoon, she strutted up to me in the cafeteria, holding a giant set of keys she had snatched from my father's belt loop. "Oops," she said loudly, pretending to drop them into the trash can. "Guess Daddy's got to clean this up too." Her friends roared with laughter as I scrambled to dig through the garbage, my face hot with shame. My dad walked over quietly, his eyes full of sadness but also pride when he saw me hold my head high and hand the keys back to him. That moment carved a scar in my memory. It wasn't just Jessica. The other students followed her lead. They excluded me from group projects, mocked me in gym class, and once, during a pep rally, chanted "Janitor's kid," while the rest of the crowd laughed. Even the teachers did nothing. I once went to the principal, Mr. Barnes, desperate for help. I stood in his office, tears streaming down my face, and explained everything Jessica and the others were doing. He sighed, adjusted his glasses, and said, "High school kids can be cruel, Elena. You just need to ignore them." His words stung almost as much as the bullying itself. At home, I hid my pain as best I could. My father, Miguel, worked long hours, and the last thing I wanted was to make him feel guilty for the job that provided for us. But he noticed. One night, as I sat at the table pretending to do homework, he put his hand on mine and said, "Mija, I know it's hard. I see the way they look at me too. But remember this, honest work is never shameful. They may laugh now, but the future doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you." His words sank deep into me, though at the time, I wasn't sure I believed them. Still, something began to change inside me. I realized that no one was going to rescue me, not the teachers, not the principal, not even my friends, who were too afraid to stand up against Jessica. If I wanted a different future, I would have to fight for it myself. I started spending more time in the library than in the cafeteria, while Jessica and her friends were busy planning homecoming outfits. I was buried in books, studying harder than ever. I took on a part-time job at a diner, saving every dollar for college. I applied for scholarships, poured myself into my grades, and slowly, I felt the power of their words fade. But the bullying didn't stop. Jessica cornered me one day in the girls' bathroom and sneered, "You'll never be more than his kid. No one will ever respect you." Those words cut deep, but instead of breaking me, they lit a fire inside me. I stared back at her and thought, one day, I'll make you eat those words. I didn't say it out loud. I wasn't ready yet. But in my heart, the promise was made. The ridicule, the whispers, the graffiti on my locker, they became fuel. I started imagining a future where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. A future where I could walk back into that school with my head held high. The idea seemed impossible at the time, but it gave me something to hold on to. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every humiliating moment was pushing me toward a decision. I was no longer going to let Crestwood High define who I was. They thought they were breaking me, but they were shaping me into someone stronger than they could ever imagine. That was the beginning of my resolve, to leave those hallways, build a life of my own, and someday return, not as the janitor's kid, but as the person who had turned pain into power. When I finally left Crestwood High, I swore I would never look back. The memories of being mocked and humiliated weighed heavily on me, but they also fueled me. I poured all that pain into determination. College became my escape route, and I worked harder than I ever thought possible. I studied late into the night, took on extra shifts at the diner, and applied for every scholarship I could find. I knew I couldn't depend on anyone else to build my future. I had to do it myself. It wasn't easy. While other students spent weekends at parties, I was cleaning tables, saving tips in a jar labeled tomorrow. My father would peek at that jar sometimes and smile, his eyes shining with pride. "Mija," he told me once, "one day that jar will be the key to doors they said you could never open." He was right. Every dollar in that jar became part of the life I was building, brick by brick. By the time I graduated college, I had a degree in business administration and a drive that couldn't be stopped. I landed my first job at a property management company, starting at the bottom. I answered phones, filed papers, and did the work no one else wanted. But I paid attention. I learned how deals were made, how properties were valued, and how businesses grew. While others complained about long hours, I treated every day like an opportunity to absorb knowledge. Years passed, and I climbed the ladder. I moved from assistant to manager, and eventually into property development. I found my passion in renovating old buildings, turning something neglected into something new and full of purpose. Every time I walked through a dusty hallway or opened a rusted door, I thought of Crestwood High and how I once felt worthless inside its walls. Fixing buildings became symbolic for me. It was like fixing the broken parts of my past. The turning point came almost a decade after I left high school. I was 31, sitting in my office reviewing property listings, when a familiar name caught my eye. Crestwood High School. I blinked twice, reading the words again. The school was listed for sale. Budget cuts and declining enrollment had forced the district to put it on the market. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Crestwood. The same place where kids chanted Janitor's Kid. The same halls where Jessica Hale laughed at me. The same office where Mr. Barnes told me to ignore it. My past, sitting in front of me as a business opportunity. I called my father that evening. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "Crestwood High is for sale." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he chuckled softly. "Mia, do you know what that means? You have a chance to write a new story in that place." At first, I hesitated. Buying a school wasn't just an investment. It was personal. It meant confronting memories I had buried deep. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This wasn't just about me. It was about every student who had been overlooked, mocked, or dismissed. It was about honoring my father, who endured whispers and cruel jokes just for doing an honest day's work. So I put in an offer. Not just any offer. I went higher than every competitor. I was determined that no one else would own those walls but me. Weeks later, the call came. "Congratulations, Miss Ruiz. The building is yours." I sat at my desk in stunned silence, then burst into tears. After years of carrying the weight of being the janitor's kid, I was now the owner of the very school where I had been humiliated. But buying it wasn't enough. I wanted closure. I wanted to walk back into Crestwood not as a victim, but as the woman who had risen above it all. I arranged a meeting with the principal and staff to discuss the change of ownership. Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, people from the community, teachers, students, even old classmates, were whispering that Elena Ruiz was coming back. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I paced my living room, rehearsing what I would say. I wasn't going there to scream or seek revenge. I was going there to stand tall, to show them that I was no longer the girl they laughed at. I was the woman who turned their cruelty into power. As I laid out the paperwork in my bag, my father's voice echoed in my mind. "The people who laugh at you now will one day answer to you." Tomorrow, I would find out if he was right. The morning I walked back into Crestwood High, my heart raced the same way it had when I was 15, carrying books down those same hallways. The walls looked almost identical, the lockers still dented, the linoleum floors still squeaking under each step. But something was different this time. Me. I wasn't a scared teenager anymore. I was a businesswoman who had fought tooth and nail for every success. And I wasn't walking in as a visitor. I was walking in as the owner. The front doors creaked open as I pushed them, and a rush of memories flooded over me. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the whispers of janitor's kid behind my back. I steadied myself, holding my head high, reminding myself why I was there. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the part of me that had been left behind in those halls. The meeting had been arranged with the staff and the current principal. As I made my way to the office, teachers and staff glanced up from their papers and computers, curious eyes following me. A few recognized me instantly, the girl who had walked these halls in hand-me-down clothes, embarrassed by the ring of keys that always clattered on her father's belt. Their eyes widened as I passed, dressed in a tailored suit, paperwork tucked neatly in my leather portfolio. When I entered the principal's office, the air grew thick with silence. Behind the desk sat Mr. Barnes, older now, his hair gray, his glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up, confused at first, then startled as recognition dawned. "Elena Ruiz?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I smiled faintly and set the folder of documents on his desk. "That's right. I'm here for the keys. I own this building now." For a moment, he simply stared, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. The man who once dismissed my tears with a shrug now sat speechless before me. I thought of the day he told me to ignore the cruelty as if it wasn't his problem. Now, it was. Before he could respond, I heard the door swing open behind me. I turned to see a face I hadn't expected to encounter so soon. Jessica Hale. She had aged, of course, but the sight of her still sent a jolt through me. She worked there now as a staff assistant. Her confident smirk was gone the moment our eyes met. "Elena?" she whispered, almost choking on my name. I nodded, calm and steady. "Hello, Jessica." Her eyes darted to the folder on the desk, then back to me. She understood in an instant. The color drained from her face. The same girl she had called worthless, the one she mocked for being the janitor's kid, now stood before her as the owner of the very building where her cruelty had flourished. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence was louder than any insult. Jessica's lips trembled, her composure cracking. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out, nearly knocking over a chair in her rush to leave. For years, she had been the one with power over me. In that moment, she couldn't even stand to be in the same room. I turned back to Mr. Barnes, who was still staring at me in disbelief. Slowly, he stood, fumbling for the ring of keys on his desk. His hands shook as he placed them into mine. "Congratulations, Ms. Ruiz," he muttered. The cold weight of those keys in my palm nearly brought me to tears. I thought of my father, Miguel, who once jingled his keys as he walked these halls, mocked by students for the very symbol of his work. Now, those same keys represented something else entirely: ownership, victory, and dignity. I stepped out into the hallway, keys in hand, and the sound echoed off the lockers. A few staff members gathered around, curious. Some clapped softly, others whispered, but I didn't need applause. I wasn't there for them. I was there for the girl I used to be, the one who had cried in bathrooms, scrubbed cruel words off her locker, and wondered if she would ever escape. Walking through those halls, I felt the past and present collide. I saw my younger self in every corner, carrying pain she didn't deserve. And I wanted to tell her, hold on, you'll rise. You'll come back one day, not as their victim, but as their proof that strength is built in the fire of humiliation. That moment wasn't about showing off wealth or power. It was about closure. It was about finally standing in the place where I had been broken and realizing I was whole again. As I left the building, the sun hit the front doors, casting a glow across the steps. I paused for a second, keys still clutched in my hand, and whispered to myself, "We did it, Dad. We finally did it." Walking out of Crestwood High with the keys in my hand, I felt like a chapter of my life had closed. But I also knew it wasn't just about me. Owning that building wasn't only about reclaiming my past. It was about shaping the future for every student who walked those halls after me. The first thing I did was call my father. His voice cracked when I told him, "Dad, I have the keys to Crestwood. It's ours now." For a moment, he was silent. Then he said, "Mija, I carried those keys on my belt for years, but they never belonged to me. Now, they belong to you, and you've turned our name into something they can never laugh at again." Hearing that from him was worth more than any title or property deal. I visited him later that week and placed the keys in his hand. He turned them over slowly, tears pooling in his eyes. "Do you know what this means?" he whispered. "Every insult, every laugh, it ends here. You've rewritten our story." I hugged him tightly, realizing that this wasn't just my victory. It was his, too. He had endured so much for me, and now I could finally give him the respect he had always deserved. When I officially took control of Crestwood, I decided I wouldn't run it like just another building. I wanted to transform it into something meaningful. I brought in a team to renovate the classrooms, brighten the hallways, and add spaces where students could feel safe and supported. I set up scholarships in my father's name, the Miguel Ruiz Scholarship Fund, for kids from working-class families who often went unnoticed, just like I once did. Every year, students would get a chance to chase their dreams without shame. One of the most emotional moments for me was standing on the stage of the old auditorium, speaking to a group of parents and students about the future of the school. I looked out at the rows of seats and remembered sitting there myself, feeling invisible. Now I was the one at the microphone saying, "No child should ever feel ashamed of who their parents are or where they come from. Every job has dignity, every family has worth, and every student has potential." The applause that followed filled me with something I had never felt inside those walls before: pride. As for Jessica Hale, I never saw her again after the day she ran out of the principal's office. Part of me wondered if she ever thought about what she had done, or if she felt even an ounce of regret. But honestly, it didn't matter anymore. My success wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about proving myself right. The girl she tried to break had risen, and she no longer held any power over me. Mr. Barnes retired shortly after the transition. I didn't waste energy on resentment toward him either. He had failed me as a principal, but carrying that bitterness would only weigh me down. Instead, I used his failure as a reminder. Leadership isn't about silence. It's about courage. That's the lesson I carried into every decision I made as the new owner. At home, my daughter Maya, just 8 years old at the time, asked me why the school was so important to me. I sat her down and said, "Because your grandpa mopped those floors with pride, and for years, people laughed at him for it. Now, we own the place. I want you to know, Maya, there is never shame in hard work. What matters is the heart you bring to it." Her eyes lit up, and she hugged me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered. That moment was more powerful than any business achievement I'd ever had. Looking back now, I realized that being called the janitor's kid was both my greatest pain and my greatest gift. It forced me to build resilience, to work harder, and to dream bigger than anyone expected. It made me promise myself that no one, not bullies, not teachers, not even principals, would ever define my worth again. That building once represented humiliation. Now it represents triumph. It's living proof that where you start does not determine where you finish. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you've ever been laughed at, underestimated, or made to feel small, remember that those moments don't define your future. They can fuel it. Sometimes, the things that break us end up shaping us into exactly who we need to be. And when the day comes that you get to walk back into the place where you once felt powerless, you'll understand that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success, peace, and the knowledge that you've risen above it. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true stories like this, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts.